Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. What's the craziest thing an ex or ex-friend has ever done to you? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I got mail delivered to my house when she found out I was going to break up with her. Then I wouldn't leave when I did break up with her. I called the police, and since she received mail at my house, they said it was officially her residence as well. I had to call my landlord and have him evict me to get her to leave. Once she left, he rescinded the eviction notice and I moved back in. My ex-boyfriend just absolutely lost it when I had enough and ended things. He took my dog when he went back to work away from home, told my parents I was suicidal, so he had to know where I was, and when I tried staying at either of my parents' places, my vehicle would get vandalized. He threatened to take me to the police because he had someone do something to his house and demanded that I give him money because it had to be me. I was at the bar on the night in question. He blackmailed me for my dog, threatening that he was going to have one of his friends shoot her or that he was going to release her in traffic, and if she gets hit, it's my fault. My work had to create a plan where the building would go on lockdown should he show up, as he was threatening that too. The final straw was when my brother left his phone out, and my ex was non-stop calling it. I picked up and lost my absolute shit. I found a place to rent, told nobody, not even family, as my dad thought I was being dramatic and should forgive him because he's a good guy on paper. Yeah, that man can be another post. And somehow made out all right, but drank a bit this time. My mom sent me a picture one day of my dog in her house, and I hauled ass to her house. She will never admit it, but I think she paid him money so I could have her, as she was important to me. Now she's snoring in bed beside me, 6 years later. One time my girlfriend, at the time, was staying over. I'd been at work late the night before, so I wanted to sleep in. She tried to wake me, it didn't work, so I fell back to sleep. So after an unknown amount of time, I was in deep sleep. She apparently lost patience. She put her mouth directly against my ear and screamed as loud as she could. A high-pitched horror movie scream. The pain was immediate. It's been about 15 years, and my left ear, if I'm in a loud place, buzzes like I've got a wasp in my ear. It sounds exactly like a blown-out speaker. This was just one of the things she did. When I broke up with her, she told all her friends I beat her up, and they still believed her. I got arrested and spent around 32 hours in jail because he pulled a prank on me. He was a designated driver. We went to a party, and I drank more than I should have. He dropped me off just over a block from my house. When I got out of the back of the car, I didn't recognize anything. I reached for my phone, but realized that I didn't have it. I walked the block looking for a street I knew but couldn't find one. I then picked a direction to walk in to search for a major street. Apparently, he thought it'd be funny to drop me off in the wrong neighborhood instead of at my house and lifted my cell phone off me so I couldn't call for help. Supposedly, his plan was to let me wander around lost for like 10 minutes and then find me to actually take me home. He never found me. After a few hours of walking around lost, I had sobered up and was thirsty. I had fought a larger street, but it was like 2 a.m. at this point, and everything was deserted, so I couldn't ask anyone for help. Eventually, I saw a police car and flagged them down for help. They told me that I was over 10 miles from my house, and that I was in a very unsafe neighborhood. They didn't believe my story. After some discussion, they offered to give me a ride home, but asked me to put my hands behind my back while they searched me for weapons. I complied, and they immediately cuffed me and told me that they were arresting me for public intoxication. I didn't have money at the time, so I didn't want to call anyone to post bail for me. Also, I kept getting told that they'd release me as soon as I was processed because I was already sober. There were no windows in the holding cell, no clock, and they never dimmed the light, so I and the others had no concept of time. I was fed twice and had access to water and a toilet. I managed to fall asleep a few times, but I kept waking up shivering. When I was finally released, it was 9 a.m., a whole day after I'd been arrested. My roommate had reported me missing and had been informed that I'd been arrested. I was able to call my roommate from a payphone and get him to pick me up. A few weeks later, I found out that the charge of public intoxication had been dropped, so thankfully I didn't have to pay a fine or take DUI classes. I have no idea what the hell is wrong with my friend who pranked me. He did apologize and felt bad, but I stopped hanging out with him after that. My friend's girlfriend called the police and told them that he had told her that he kept hearing voices telling him to kill her, which was a complete fabrication. The cops came and put him in a psychiatric ward for 3 days of observations until the doctors finally believed he was sane. She did it during final exam week when he was in college. She was straight evil. She attempted to catfish me on a black plane using a picture she manually snapped from a magazine as her profile picture. I could see it seemed to be in the center of the picture. I knew it was her because she had a very poor grasp of grammar, and she makes specific mistakes that no one makes. When we met on the site, before I realized who she was, I asked why was she single. She stated that her ex-boyfriend died 2 years ago. Considering she pulled a gun on me in a prior instance, that may well have ended up being true. We'd been broken up for about 10 months and hadn't spoken in 7. For completely unrelated reasons, after our breakup, I had moved across the country, as in I had been living on the East Coast and moved to California. She had found out where I lived, flown out there, rented a car, and was parked on my block, scouting out my house. In the car were a pair of binoculars, a book on bird watching to explain to any passerby why she was staring around a neighborhood with binoculars, and a cat carrier. She didn't have a cat. I did. She was planning to break into my house and steal my cat. She'd even bought a return flight ticket back to the East Coast with the pet fee paid. The ex-fiance ended our 8-year relationship and called off our wedding 5 months before the date with a typed note that was less than 300 words long. She said she kept not being excited about getting married, so she decided she didn't want to get married anymore. A week or 2 passes and I find out she cheated on me with a mutual friend. I called her and she told me she had to do it and to please stop fixating on it. I ended up confronting the guy and ruining her prospects with him. 9 months later, she married a different guy 20 years her senior, pregnant with his child, on what would have been our dating anniversary. She recorded the ceremony, so I got to see it circulating. Her vows were all about how the new guy was better than me. I thought to myself, bullet successfully dodged. I'm sure words of validation from an internet stranger, don't mean too much, but yeah, you completely dodged a bullet. Sounds kind of trashy, so you're better off. Bye. My ex-best friend would beg me to get on so I could listen to her troubles. I tried sharing my troubles once and she literally gave the worst advice, and I told her I couldn't do that. She said, "Well, I can't help you if you won't help yourself," and she unfriended and blocked me. We had been friends for 12 years. I told her I was super anxious about midterms and was fighting with my folks. She told me to quit halfway through my senior year of college and to move out of my parents' house, which I couldn't afford at the time. I just needed to drink some chamomile tea and maybe we can talk about how you can solve this. Tried to suffocate me. I had fallen asleep on his pull-out couch at his apartment while we went out with friends. I wake up at 1 a.m. and start to pack my stuff up to go home because I had work in the morning. Just as I'm leaving, he comes in and says, "Baby, you're still here?" I reply, "Baby, where were you?" in a nice sweet tone. He then starts yelling and calling me every name in the book. I start hysterically crying, and he tells me to shut up, but I can't, just kept crying. So he pushes me on the pullout and puts one hand around my neck and a pillow on my face, and I can't breathe. Some voice in my head told me to stay calm, so instead of struggling, I just laid there calmly, and after maybe 30 seconds, he picked up the pillow, and I got out of there. I sometimes wonder if I would have fought back if he had held me down longer and killed me. Left me homeless. We had decided to move in together, so I gave my notice to my landlord. This was a college town, so my landlord called the next person on the waiting list and they signed a lease that day. My boyfriend, my ex now, was living in a rented room and hadn't yet given his landlord his notice. When I saw him that night, he said he would have to call his landlord in the morning because he had to give notice and it was the last day he could not pay rent for the next month. We needed his portion of the rent along with mine to afford the new apartment. We got into an argument that night, and I decided to go along with mine home to cool off that night. The next day he was unreachable. It didn't bother me too much. I had a full day that day and called him the next day, and he sounded fine. Then he waited almost a week, then offhandedly mentioned that he didn't call the landlord, so he couldn't move in with me. He knew I didn't have the money to move into the new apartment now. I asked him why he didn't call and give notice that day, and he said because you didn't seem too worried about it when you argued with me that night I broke up with him right then and there. And here's the funniest part. He was shocked. 2 weeks later, I was living on the other side of the state and ignoring his letters. I dated a guy in high school when I was 16 to 17. He was 17 to 18. Neither of us were particularly mentally healthy. I was very depressed and he's a narcissist. We had a very tumultuous breakup. I moved away for college and came back a year later. We were friends. He had convinced himself by the time I was gone that we were going to be getting back together. But at that point, I'd had enough time away to realize how terribly manipulative and cruel he was the entire time we were together. So I was not about to realize it. He kept telling me he wouldn't take no for an answer, and he'd convinced me. I kind of just ignored him and did my own thing. I hooked up with a mutual friend that I'd known way longer than I knew my ex. It had nothing to do with him, but he took it personally. He found out and wrote a song. He had an aspiring rap career about how much he hated me and wanted to kill me. I had my full name in it and everything. Every single one of my friends turned against me, whether they thought I did anything wrong or not. He stalked me for 3 years, and I have no idea if he's still interested in me or not. I have an entire album on my phone of screenshots for court if it comes to that. He showed up at my mom's house. He didn't realize I wasn't living there anymore, stalked my current boyfriend, showed up at my jobs, and made multiple accounts to reach me on all social media. The shit he has sent me is insane, like psychotic. Thinks he's Shakespeare kind of stuff. Half of it doesn't make any sense. The horny messages are the scariest. I still have nightmares about him being in my house all the time. Terrible stuff. Worst part, his mom is a lawyer, and when I reached out to her to tell her about the stuff he was doing, she told me it wasn't her problem, but she hoped we could work it out between the two of us because she missed me and thought we were great together. My ex called me 1 week later after breaking up with me, asking what I was doing for the night. I had plans to go to Friday night Magic the Gathering with a friend. She proceeded to call me every 10 minutes. She said she was going to kill herself and banged her head against the wall until she knocked herself out. I had to quit the tournament and have my friends drive me home so I could talk with her on the phone all night. I was here the next day because she said she wanted to be sure we had broken up. She broke up with me again because she didn't feel anything anymore. I was an emotional wreck, and she made it a roller coaster of a relationship. She then ghosted me, even though she said she wanted to be friends. I never got closure, and it messed me up for a few years. Bitch was crazy. In my 20s, I lived with a woman and things hadn't been going well. Breakup time. It was my lease, and she had no intention of staying there permanently, so I told her I would stay at a friend's house for the rest of the month while she found a new place. Because I was nice. That gave her about 3 weeks. I went on an impromptu road trip with my buddy about 2 weeks into it, and when I got back, she let me know she had moved out while I was away, so about a week prior. When I got back to my apartment, every single thing I owned was piled up in the center of the living room. This isn't an exaggeration. The apartment looked ready to rent to new tenants, except for the massive pile of furniture, collectibles, clothing, medicine cabinets, content, food from the fridge and pantry, and since it was June, effing maggots. It took a week to really sort through it. I kept finding more effed up stuff, like my childhood teddy bear ripped at his neck, so his head just dangled there, 25-year-old stuffing, bleeding out. I keep imagining her dragging heavy shit around, carrying on with this for days probably. Epilogue. I ran into an old girl about a year later at a show. She acted like she was happy to see me after all this time, and as if nothing totally effed up hadn't happened. Ain't love grand?